Why isn't Donald Trump coming tomorrow? Because he has a 4-year-old mentality, and he's having a he's having a tantrum. He's having a tantrum. What is the tantrum? That the rest of the world says, we don't want a king. As President Lula said, we don't need an emperor. He would come here as just one of 20 leaders, or 21. He doesn't want that. He's having a tantrum. So this rebalancing is happening. He's having a particular tantrum, by the way, because the United States is in a deeply neurotic funk. You know what the cause of that neurosis is? China. A wonderful, brilliant civilization, 4,000 years old plus. It's been a unified state with brilliant statecraft for more than 2,000 years. Unlike Europe, in which every country of Europe fought every other country of Europe every year for 1,000 years. Most of the time, China was peaceful, united. It fragmented temporarily at some points, but it was mainly a unified country that actually, strangely enough, didn't beat up its neighbors also. So China, for 1,000 years, never attacked Japan, for example. Can you imagine? Britain couldn't keep its hands off any place for more than a year or two at a time. It had to go beat up somebody. And the United States doesn't even take a year off. I don't know the truth yet. It could be an accident, but I don't think so. Today, a major refinery in Venezuela suddenly exploded. That seems a lot like the CIA to me. I don't guarantee it. We don't have any more news. But last week, President Trump said he had assigned the CIA to operations inside Venezuela, and a week later, suddenly the biggest refinery blows up. So the United States can hardly go a week at a time without trying to kill somebody. But China actually goes centuries without attacking its neighbors. So China went for 1,000 years without once invading Japan, a near neighbor, even though China was much more powerful. Incidentally, from 2 times, there was an attempt to invade Japan from the Chinese mainland, but that was when China had been conquered by the Mongols. So 800 years ago, roughly, they tried twice. The Mongols tried to invade Japan, and they were defeated both times. But the Chinese never tried. The Japanese actually, sadly, invaded China many times, but never the other way around. And the Chinese never invaded Korea. And the Chinese did invade Vietnam once, but that was 615 years ago. And then they had a skirmish for 1 month in 1979. Other than that, that's the so-called enemy of the United States. So that's why I call it a neurosis. China's the least threat possible. Doesn't threaten anybody. Doesn't attack anybody. Hasn't been in any war for 46 years, and the war that it was in 46 years ago lasted 1 month. That's when Vietnam toppled a government in Cambodia that China viewed as an ally, and so it punished Vietnam for a month. for having overthrown their ally in Cambodia. Other than that, no wars for more than 4 decades. But we're in a funk because the American idea is you have to be number one so you can boss everyone else around. And by the way, we learned every trick we know from the British, who did that for 200 years before that. So that's where the geopolitics comes in. So while the United States wasn't watching, and I know they weren't watching because they're not very clever there in Washington, I have to tell you, and they don't understand much of economics at all. They weren't paying attention, but China was growing at 10% per year, thank you. And if you do that, you double the size of your economy every 7 years. And if you do that for 35 years, which China did, you've doubled 5 times. And doubling 5 times means you've grown 32 times. And if you continue beyond that, China has increased the size of its economy 40 times since 1980. 40 times. It's now a bigger economy than the United States. It's a much bigger industrial power. It is technologically more advanced than the United States in most sectors, not all, but in most sectors right now. When you drive your vehicles 10 years from now, they will be Chinese electric vehicles. And even if you happen to drive a Tesla, that's a Chinese vehicle, by the way, with Elon Musk at the top. But it's the gigafactory in Shanghai that gives it even a chance to compete. So China made it, and that's why we're at the end of yet another cycle. The European imperial age is over. The British imperial age ended in 1945, and the U.S. imperial age is ending right now. And that's why Donald Trump is home. Because he doesn't want to be one of several. That's all. The delusion is still in Washington, by the way. It's not over. It's still a powerful country. It's still a dangerous country. It's got too big a military. It still has its hands on the valves of the international payment system to a large extent. It can turn on and off the spigot for countries that are vulnerable. Remember, the IMF and the World Bank are U.S. institutions, even though they are multilateral institutions. They were founded for not bad purposes, by the way, but they are American-dominated institutions, and that gives continuing power. And I always emphasize geography in thinking about economics. So the geography is that at Pennsylvania Avenue, which is where the White House is, now there's a West Wing and no East Wing because he knocked it down a couple weeks ago, this idiot. Excuse me. Sorry. It's true. I'm just being technical. At 16th in Pennsylvania is the White House. 15th in Pennsylvania is the Treasury Building. 17th in Pennsylvania is what's called the Executive Office of the President of the U.S. 18th in Pennsylvania is the World Bank. And 19th in Pennsylvania is the International Monetary Fund. So it's only 2 blocks from the president's office to tell the IMF what to do. You don't even need to text it. It takes 30 seconds to walk across the street to say, veto that country's program. And that's still power. But it's power that is fading. It's fading in part because of the BRICS. Because the BRICS are saying, we don't need to be under the thumb of a U.S. empire. That's what President Lula said when he was hosting the BRICS this summer, and Trump put on a tariff on Brazil because he didn't like a court proceeding against the preceding president who had tried to make a coup. And so he put on a penalty tariff, and President Lula said, we don't need an emperor, and we're not going to succumb to this kind of pressure. So the BRICS, of which you are an esteemed member, the S in BRICS, remember the 10 BRICS countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now Egypt and Ethiopia, United Arab Emirates, Iran, and Indonesia. The 10 BRICS countries have 46% of the world population. Thank you. And 41% of the world GDP. And they can look at the G7 and say, who are you? And that's what they're doing. So this is the new phase of geopolitics. The world is not falling apart, but the US and Europe are having a tantrum. That's different. And the world is not fragmenting. The US is isolating itself. It doesn't even go to the parties anymore. It puts on tariffs. It says, you can't have our market. And the rest of the world says, okay, because your market's not so important for us. And Trump said, okay, we're going to punish you, China, for being so successful, by the way. We're going to put 100% tariff on you. And the next hour, China said, okay, we're putting 120% tariff on you. And then Trump said, okay, we're going to restrict any advanced chips going to you. And China said, okay, no rare earth magnets. And the US, within a half an hour, said, we surrender. By the way, I had no idea there was anything called a rare earth magnet before all of this happened. So I had to ask ChatGPT what it was exactly. It turns out it's absolutely essential for all manufacturing, for automotive, for military, and so on. And China makes them. The US doesn't make them. And so turned out the US learned a bit of a lesson there. Again, yet another reason why Donald Trump is staying home. So this is why we're at such a historic juncture. But the world is really not fragmenting. It's remaining open and it's trading. It's just that one corner of the world is very surly. The part that used to dominate just can't figure out what's going on. And Trump is, of course, trying to flex the military muscles in a disgusting way. The U.S. is still militarily powerful, no doubt about it. The wars in Ukraine and Gaza are imperial wars. The war in Ukraine came because the United States said after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we'll move all our military bases up to the Russian border. The United States said to President Gorbachev, we promise NATO won't move 1 inch eastward. Not 1 inch. And if you want all the documentary record of that, go to a website called National Security Archive of George Washington University, and go to a website that is called What Gorbachev Heard. And you'll find 42 documents or so that say all of what I just said, that the U.S. promised NATO would never enlarge. But as soon as the Soviet Union ended, and the United States said, we're all alone in this, then they started exactly what they promised they wouldn't do, which was eastward enlargement of NATO. And that's why there's the war in Ukraine. It's a disgrace. And it is killing the Ukrainians. And it is part of the famous adage of Henry Kissinger, which you may recall, that to be an enemy of the United States is dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. Ukraine said, we'll be a friend, and now they're dying because of that. Because they said, okay, NATO enlarged. The United States said, we have your back. And probably 2 million Ukrainians have been killed or gravely wounded in this completely unnecessary and reckless war. And the United States is doing the same with Israel in Gaza. And let me thank you, South Africa, for standing up for justice. It was very brave, very right, very precise to launch the International Court of Justice case on Israel's violation of the 1948 Genocide Convention. The ICJ takes too long to rule, but the evidence that South Africa brought on behalf of the whole world is absolutely right and compelling. I want solidarity. I want solidarity across countries and across the world. And for Africa, solidarity for me means African unity, true African unity. African unity started as an organizational form in 1963. The United States, Britain, and France hated it. They don't want African unity. When they saw leaders that would unify like Patrice Lumumba, they killed them or they overthrew them, because empires like divide and conquer. The colonial period left Africa with 54 or 55 countries, depending on how you count it. That's a lot. And each one by itself cannot achieve the future that it wants. It can't resist the diplomacy or the attacks on diplomacy by itself. It can't resist the pressures. It can't resist the financial squeeze. It can't resist the instabilities that come from a market that's too small. Unity is the key. Solidarity is the key. And also, this is why this university is so crucial, because you are not only the University of South Africa, you are a South African university all over Africa. So I'm reading UNISA as Universities of Africa, because you are not only the leader here, but you're a leader across the continent. And so on your own campuses and your connections with other universities around this continent, work together to pull the unity of knowledge, of education, of training, and of good advice to the national governments and to the empowerment of the African Union as a true union. And I want Africa to make the continental free trade area really work. I want this continent is the same size as India and China in population. actually a little bit bigger than China, probably just about the same with India right now. 1.5 billion people in Africa, 1.5 billion people in India, 1.4 billion people in China. They're the little one on the block. China ended its poverty in 40 years through good planning and this mass national scale. India is on the path of ending its poverty now. It's about 15 years behind China in the reforms that opened up that led to the rapid takeoff. It's time for Africa now, as this giant, as a continental scale economy, to be the era of takeoff. And that will come with a continental scale economy and a continental scale strategy. And that means solidarity. So I want to commend you for the wonderful role that you're playing. I would like to say that for me, the single most important investment for the next 20 years is to make sure that this is the fastest learning continent, that this is a continent that is filled with knowledge, filled with education everywhere. By the way, the adults, the children, this should be a time of the greatest advancement of learning and knowledge in Africa, and what you will learn will help light the whole world. Thank you very much.